Alright guys, so what we are going to do now is we are going to look into how we can play around with some of these sort of atmosphere and effects to completely transform a scene really. I've just got this basic scene with this landscape we've been using in some other videos and these low poly trees. And it looks okay, but with some of these effects changes we can make it a lot more dynamic, I suppose is the word. So we're going to start with something like a bit of fog, something that is used a lot within games. So we'll start there. From the initial template, you'll notice that you'll have some of these boxes in here. You've got this light mass importance volume. We've got this one called post-process volume, which we are going to be using. There's also one called atmospheric fog, and you might think, okay, I can use that for my fog, but I wouldn't. Just we're not going to use it. There's one which works a lot better. So I'm going to click that atmospheric fog, and I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to come over on the left-hand side to visual effects, and I'm going to bring in this one called exponential height fog. Drop that in. And already, I don't know if you can kind of see there's a slight change, but not a great deal. So what we want to change is if we come over to the settings here, first of all, we've got this fog density, and 0.02 is really no low number, isn't it? So I just put it to 1. Well, you can see there's an immense amount of fog immediately. Which I don't know, you might want to go for an effect like that. But I'll drop that down to about 0.5, 0.2, maybe 0.1, 0.1 should we say for now? It's fairly foggy. We also want to maybe look at this thing called the start distance. So if I crank that up, you see how the fog starts further away. So you might want everywhere to be really foggy, or you might want to be the fog in the distance. So that's what you can use the start distance for. And then the only other thing you really use is the height fall off. And if you crank that number up, it keeps the fog lower against the ground. And the lower the number, the more the fog kind of goes up into the sky. So it depends what you're kind of creating. That kind of low level fog along the ground, kind of horror game-ish kind of esque, or just general, your typical foggy day fog. Adjust that how you need to. So I'll crank it up just so it's a bit more visually obvious for you guys to see. There we go. So we've got some fog. It's a start. We also with the fog, just before I forget, there's also a way of colouring the fog there. If I turn that down to white, it's a bit more traditional. Blue makes it obviously a bit more stylized. So whatever colour you want can be put in there. Okay, so that's the exponential fog. So if you're adding fog, super easy. That's it. It's done. What we're going to use now is this post-process volume. That is in here from the template. So if you don't have it in, you can drag one in, post-process volume. And there's a whole bunch of settings down here. Now, notice how it's a box, but by default, I scroll all the way down here in the settings, post-process volume settings, this infinite extent unbound here is turned on by default. And that means that it's unbound, so it's not bound to this box. It will affect the entire scene. If you want any of your effects to just be specified in an area that you might walk into, make sure you untick this so it will be affected just in the box. So let's have a look at, I'm not going to go for every one, but there's all these settings you can go through. And as I've said previously, try them out, see what they do, play around with them. And you might find an effect that you didn't even know you could do. So what we're going to look at first in these lens effects, bloom is a good one. So you've got all these other things like method, threshold. Don't worry about those. I'm just going to look at the intensity. So if I crank that up, you can see the effect if I crank it up really high as opposed to really low. So bloom is one of those things, and it's kind of a sort of brightness, but with a kind of glowy effect on the stuff that it hits. It's an interesting one. Play around with it and see the effect of it. So that's bloom. Can add that in there. Lens flare we can turn on. So if I hit the intensity for lens flare, that's, when you look up at the sun. So I look up at the sun there. I've got this this lens flare shining down, and you can change the intensity of that. We halve it. Let's play my game as it stands at the moment. So I've got this fog in the distance. If I look up at the sun there, I've got this lens flare shining down. So things are starting to be a bit more dynamic already. What I'm actually going to do, in the previous video I showed how to change the time of day. I want to change the time of day, again something a bit more atmospheric. So let's find my light source. It's a bit low down, bring it up there. And I'm going to make it a bit more across, like maybe like that. Sky sphere, refresh that material. Yeah, it's a bit more, look at that, it's better. A bit more atmospheric. I will need to rebuild the lighting, but let's just play that how it is. And then, where's the sun gone? If I go over here, when the sun kind of appears from behind the trees there, we can see this lens flare. And things are looking really nice already. What else can we do? Let's go back to our post-processing. Let's close lens flare, image effect, our vignette. So if I turn on the vignette, that's like, well, again, if I crank it up, kind of darkens the edges of the screen. So it's nice to have just a little bit of that on there. Again, that's going to be, all these things are just down to you, just playing around with them. Another thing that's really nice to do is a bit of color grading. So any of you that know Photoshop, you can change that into like black and white, and you can change the contrast, brightness, and all that of an image. This is kind of that, but for your game. So if we go to global, you've got all these in here. So let's turn on saturation. You can do it individually by RGB values, but Y will do the whole thing. So if I turn that down, see how we can essentially turn the whole game to black and white if we wanted to. If you really wanted to go for that effect. Or you can crank it up somewhere in between, up to you. Again, contrast is a really nice one. So we turn contrast on, we can have a really low contrast or really high contrast. The best thing to do is to kind of play around with both of them. If you wanted it a lot brighter, if I really turn up the saturation, super bright, but maybe I don't want that. I prefer it a bit darker actually. All right, so yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm not going to go through all of them. That's kind of a whiz through some of the ones you can do. Again, you can play around with them. Those are the ones that I like to do. So let me just build my lighting now for the updates that I've made, because you can see, the preview text which has been stretched along the ground there. That means that the lighting needs rebuilding because this isn't a true reflection of the final product. So here we go. Okay, a little bit of an error there with the trees. I think we can fix that. If you get this error, here's a way of fixing it. If you get some of the trees I can see are fine, some of them have gone black. So I'm going to go to my static mesh, load it up, and all I'm going to do is come down on the settings until you find the light map resolution and just crank it up. I'm going to like 250, something like that. Save it, and there you go. You can see the trees look fine. Okay, so that's a quick fix if you get that blackness problem. So if I play the game now, you can see the fog in the distance. We can see there's the light kind of coming through the trees when I go like that. There's like the lens flare and the bloom effect that I've added on. So it all just kind of starts looking really nice compared to how it did in the beginning. So yeah, there we are. Just a few simple settings. Within 10 minutes, we've changed the whole dynamics of the environment and how things look. So play around with those with yours, see what effect that you can get. If you're doing an interior scene, there's still some things that you could use here. But yeah, just go for it, and hopefully you'll get the effect that you want. That's all for now.